The Naked Truth Report is brought to you by Kathleen Wells.
Welcome to the Naked Truth Report with your host, truth warrior and mythbuster Kathleen Wells. The place where we distinguish fact from fiction, where data is used to drive points home, and where Kathleen takes the position that Democrats and black politicians have destroyed black America. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report. Now, your host, Kathleen Wells.
The Commission has concluded that a properly regulated system of legal immigration is in the national interest of the United States. The Commission emphasizes nuclear family. We recommend, as a priority, the closest family members, spouses and minor children of citizens of legal immigrants and parents of citizens are admitted as expeditiously as possible. I urge the Congress to adopt tough policies needed to verify employment authorization. What the Commission is concerned about are the unskilled workers in our society in an age in which unskilled workers have far too few opportunities open to them. When immigrants are less well educated and less skilled, they may pose economic hardships for the most vulnerable of Americans, particularly those who are unemployed or underemployed. And the Commission sees no justification to the continued entry of unskilled foreign workers unless the rationale for their admission otherwise serves a significant national interest, as does the admission of nuclear family members and refugees.
Did you hear that? I mean, that's like a female version of President Trump, isn't it? That warms my heart to hear that. I'm Kathleen Wells, your host of the Naked Truth Report. I'm excited to be here. This is my debut show, and I'm excited to be here. This is my first show. And I want to tell you a little something about me before I get into the meat of the program. We will focus heavily on immigration, legal and illegal immigration. We will focus heavily on Black America. Because why? I'm a Black American. And someone is not talking about what is happening to Black America. Someone is not talking about it. No politicians are talking about it. Black politicians are not talking about it. Black talking heads in the mainstream media are not talking about it. So someone has to talk about it. I'm here in Los Angeles, and blacks are regressing economically. We're sinking economically. And why isn't anyone talking about it? This bothers me. Listen, let me tell you a little bit of something about me before I get into the meat of the issue. This show is, I had a political show since 2011 at KCAA. I talked about everything political. I talked about fracking and the economy and foreign policy. But, after doing my show for so many years, I did it from a liberal perspective. I did it as a progressive. But after doing the show for a year or two, I began to dig deeper. I began to dig deeper and look at the data. See, I'm a data girl, so data matters. Data tells the story. So when I dug deeper, I began to see information that people normally don't talk about in the mainstream media. Do you ever see data discussed in the mainstream media? Is that ever discussed? And some of the experts that I looked at, you could see their lectures on YouTube were Frank Morris, who's going to be my guest today. We're going to bring him on after I finish doing my monologue. Frank Morris is an expert on immigration, and also Dr. Claude Anderson and Peter Kawasnow. His last name is spelled Kirsnow. These folks talk about how immigration is adversely impacting Black America. But all you have to do is, like in the law, they say, do you have constructive notice of something? Do you realize something just by empirical data? Just look around Los Angeles and you see Black folks are disappearing. They're not working. In fact, my friend Ted Hayes, who's an activist, says that the new neighborhood for Black Americans is Skid Row. Why isn't Maxine Waters talking about this fact? Why isn't Karen Bass, who is my congresswoman, I'm her constituent, why isn't she talking about the fact that the new neighborhood for Black Americans is Skid Row? In fact, the Los Angeles Times did an article a couple of months ago that, Black folks are facing a job crisis. What? What is that? Wait, we've been here how long? 400 years. And I'm talking to the folks who are Black Americans who are the direct descendants of slaves. That's 96% of us. 96% of Black Americans are the direct descendants of slaves. We have been here 400 years. We have been here 400 years, and we now are facing a job crisis in Los Angeles. What is that about? What is that about? Why is that happening? Why isn't Maxine Waters talking about that? Why isn't Karen Bass talking about that? Why aren't the Black talking heads on CNN and MSNBC talking about that? Who is it? Van Jones, Angela Rye. Who else is it? None of them mention it. None of them ever discuss the data. Never discuss the data. We are literally drowning. We are literally drowning in America. And no one discusses it. Does it matter? Does it matter? Does it matter what's happening to Black Americans in America? Does it matter? Do you care? I care because I'm a Black American. I care because my family has been here for, in fact, my cousin traced back my family to the 1700s. We went as far back to the 1700s. As I said before, 97% of us are direct descendants of slaves. Obama wasn't a direct descendant of slaves. Kamala Harris isn't a direct descendant of slaves. Therefore, they do not represent our interests. They do not represent our interests. Do you hear what I'm saying? My interest is the interest of direct descendants of slaves. That is 97% of Black Americans. 97% of us are direct descendants of slaves. Did I thank AM 870 The Answer for welcoming me to this station? You guys welcomed me with open arms. I didn't get a chance to do that because I get so excited about this issue. I got to tell you, I get so excited about this issue. Listen, when I drove over here, I was listening to George Lopez on, he does his comedy thing on Showtime or HBO. I was listening to that. And, who does he stand up for? He stands up for Latinos, right? Because he is a Latino. So I stand up for Black Americans. Why? Because I am a Black American. And I want to know why aren't the talking heads on CNN, Van Jones, Angela Rye, who else? Maxine Waters, why aren't they standing up for Black Americans? Why are they pro illegal immigration when all the data tells us that illegal immigration is smashing Black America? Do you know the data? And in fact, not only do they not talk about the data, they support illegal immigration. They spew liberal hogwash. They never talk about the data. The Democrats, the liberals have an agenda, and that agenda goes against Black Americans. And that is why I only voted for Obama one time. That is why I only voted for him one time. And that is why I voted for President Trump. And that is why my job on this show is to get Black Americans who are the direct descendants of slaves off the, Democratic plantation. That is my job. And I'm going to do that by giving you information. I'm going to do that by giving you data. Do you understand? We cannot continue this way. In fact, let's see. I'm going to give you some data. Here's some data. Black Americans 200 years ago owned 0.5% of the wealth of America. Fast forward to today, we own 0.5% of the wealth of this nation. We are regressing. We are regressing. Why isn't that a problem? Why isn't that a problem? Why isn't anyone talking about it in the mainstream media? We are being devastated. As Black activist Ted Hayes says, the new neighborhood, I've said this, the new neighborhood for Black Americans is Skid Row. Do you know that one of the first real estate tycoons in Los Angeles was a Black woman slave? Do you know that? Her name is Biddy Mason. You can look it up. You can Google it. They wrote an article about her in the Los Angeles Times. So does a 400-year history matter in a country? That's the question. Does a 400-year history in a country matter? Does my father's blood, sweat, and tears in America matter? He fought in World War II. Does my grandfather's blood, sweat, and tears in America matter? As I said, we trace my family back, my cousin Bobby, trace my family back to the 1700s. I'm sure we could go back further to the 1600s. Does that matter? Is that relevant? Is it significant? If it's significant, why is Maxine Waters, why are all the Democrats, why is the Congressional Black Caucus arguing on the behalf of illegal immigrants? Why? That's the question. I want to know. As I said, I used to be liberal. I'm no longer liberal. It's unbearable. I can't take it. It's unbearable. And you can Google, like I've written for Huffington Post and Counterpunch and Truth Out, and you can see my interviews with members of the House and Senate. You can see my interviews with Maxine Waters and Diane Watson and Cornel West and Senator Sherrod Brown. Google my name, Kathleen Wells, Huffington Post. Bobby Scott and Barbara Lee, and I even interviewed Ron Paul. You can see my interviews. I used to be liberal. There's no way I can be liberal anymore. I will never vote Democrat again. Black Americans have supported Democrats loyally for 5 decades. And what do we get? We're pushed to the side. Our interest is not pursued. This is a problem. This is a problem. We are drowning in these sanctuary cities. We are drowning in these sanctuary cities, and something needs to be done. Someone needs to talk about it. I just can't believe, this is the thing that I want to say. This is the thing that I want to say. Democrats do not have the moral high ground to criticize anyone. They do not possess the moral high ground. We are losing. Black Americans have been the most loyal constituent, most loyal voting bloc of Democrats. We have undergirded, we have sustained the Democrats for 5 decades. And so Democrats, they don't have the moral high ground to criticize Trump regarding anything. Maxine Waters doesn't have I want to bring her into the studio and have an interview with her, but she shouldn't have the gumption, the gall to criticize anyone. Her district is now majority Latino, but black people put her into office. And what has she done? What has the Congressional Black Caucus done for Black Americans? Ever? This really bothers me. It really bothers me. I have a guest. I'm going to bring on my guest, but one piece of data, because I am a data girl, one piece of data that I want to mention before I bring on my guest. My guest is Frank Morris, an immigration expert and the former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and someone who I learned a lot about the data regarding the adverse impact of illegal immigration on Black America. The information is out there. You can find it. Irrespective, despite what the mainstream media says, they're spewing lies. They're spewing an agenda. The truth is out there. And it's interesting that the Black experts who are telling the truth are never highlighted in the media. Do you understand? They're never in the mainstream media. They're never on MSNBC. Thus, that's why my show is called The Naked Truth, because you're not going to get the naked truth from MSNBC. You're going to get propaganda and an agenda, right? Because it's so obvious. It's so obvious. But let me, as I said, I'm a data girl. Let me give the audience, the listening audience, one piece of information. And here it is. In 1960, 40% of blacks had or owned their own businesses. 40%. In the 1960s, 80% of black families were two-parent. Do you understand that? 87% of black families in the 1960s were two-parent. So let's fast forward to today. Can anyone guess the data? Can anyone tell me the percentage? Can anyone guess what that percentage is today? Can anyone? Let me bring it up. Hold on. It's dismal. Today, less than 7% of blacks own their own businesses, and only 25% of black families are two-parent. Now, everyone knows that the strongest institution in society is what? The family. The strongest institution in society is the family. So what does that tell you? If we have these kinds of numbers for Black America today, that despite 5 decades of loyally voting Democrat, what do those numbers tell you? If the most important institution in a society is the family, and less than 20% of black families, or was it 25% of black families, are two-parent, what does that tell you? Okay, as I said, I'm a data girl. I'm gonna go now to Frank Morris, my guest. He is the dean or the executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and he is the former dean of the graduate studies at Morgan State University. Frank Morris, are you there?
Yes, I am, Kathleen. Glad to hear you.
I'm glad you're joining me. This is my debut show on AM 870, The Answer. I'm so glad to be here, and they've welcomed me here with open arms, and I'm glad you're my first guest.
Well, it's a real honor, so it's a real pleasure. What you're doing needs to be done so much. We're biblical people, and we say that without vision, the people perish. And I don't think that we have the right vision. Our leaders certainly don't, especially in regards to such things as jobs and the impact of immigration on jobs.
Yeah, immigration, in fact, I learned this from you, Frank, that you said immigration that's legal or illegal is not exempt from the laws of supply and demand. Exactly. I got that from you. Explain that a little further.
Well, the most basic law of economics is the following. It's dependent upon the law, so-called law of supply and demand. The price is influenced by demand, the price of any good, the value of any good. If you increase the supply of any good, the price is down. And therefore, if the demand decreases, the price will go down. So price is influenced by supply and demand. Now, if you increase the supply of goods, the price goes down. It's like water is tremendously, it's vital for us, but we will pay often more for many other kinds of things than water because water is more plentiful and cheaper. Now, it may not always be that way. When it gets right down to the nitty-gritty, it's going to be water other than beer or anything else that will sustain us for life. But this is now, in economics, in labor economics, wages are influenced by the number of workers, the availability of workers, and the demand for the product. When the demand for any product, for Japanese automobiles, Rolex watches, are very high, you can have a high price. And therefore, and the price will stay high as long as the supply is low. Once you overwhelm the supply, then the price will drop. And it's the same way with labor and working people. When you have a lot of workers bidding for one job, the employer doesn't have to pay a high wage because he or she has plenty of choices. And that's what we're facing in America. No one seems to recognize that the supply of workers, especially illegal workers, affects both wages, the wages that are paid for jobs, and there's also, for black workers, a substitution effect. All of us have known throughout history that black workers were the last hired but the first fired, And there have been books on that. Who Needs the Negro in the past, in the 70s, by Wellheim, and numerous others, that the only time you have a high demand for black workers is when all the other workers are not available. And that's why if you go back in history, you'll find the times that we were working often during times of war, when you had most black people working higher wages, when there was not a supply of other workers. And so the most fundamental law is that when you have 1 million people coming in legally, and maybe another up to 500,000 coming per year illegally, and the illegal ones and the legal ones, especially the illegal ones, competing directly with jobs that are less skilled and low wages that black folks need to take, then you've got a substitution effect as well as a wage
Kathleen, and
effect.
But
the real big lie is to say that these are jobs Americans won't do. In reality, they're jobs Americans won't do because they're jobs Americans can't get.
Right.
Data from the Center for Immigration Studies looked at all of the different categories where you have high immigrant labor pools, and most Americans think that these jobs are either in the fields and agriculture or landscaping. When in reality, of all the illegal workforce, less than 8% of them are working in those two fields. That the majority of the illegal workforce is in 3 areas. And first area is the services. Hospital services, nursing home services, numerous other kinds of services, especially in the health sector. They're working also in construction. Yeah. And then the third area is in light manufacturing.
Yeah, this is something.
These areas, which are more than 80% of the illegal workforce, Americans are overwhelmingly in each of them.
Right, and this is something that I want to emphasize. This is something I want to stress, because whenever you talk to a liberal or a progressive, or whenever you talk to a Democrat, whatever the label, someone who's not conservative and someone who's not in the real world, whenever you talk to them, and then the narrative consistently in the mainstream media is that, they do jobs that Americans don't want. This is the biggest lie. Okay, we're busting this myth. This is the biggest lie, because I know in California, in Los Angeles, illegal immigrants do construction work heavy, dominantly. And
many times, many black folks, including middle-class black folks, are surprised to see a black worker at a construction job, and they say, "Well, why?" Or they'll go to the places of the South where either blacks are in control, local government control, and they'll see them there, and they won't see them in other places, and or working on public sector projects instead of private sector ones, which the private sector ones get around the labor laws by hiring contractors and not asking and not using such things as E-Verify. What at the root of this is the profit maximization. And profit maximization aims at getting the cheapest, most vulnerable workers, and those are not Americans. I hope your audience can bear with me for a minute. Years and years, the black unemployment rate has been double the white unemployment rate in this country. And the economists and the apologists would usually try to blame black workers. They'll say, they would say 2 things. They would say, well, black workers are not as well educated as white workers, which is a blatant lie. And then they say, well, black workers, they don't speak English well enough to get in many of these jobs. All the while, you see now, illegal workers, especially in low-skilled occupations, coming up, many of them from Central America, and they have less than a junior high school education, and they have no English skills, but they get the jobs because employers prefer them, and because they can be cheaper workers. And it's just black folks buy this. And we're continuing, but it goes not just for the low-skilled workers, it goes all the way up. Many black workers and white workers too, American workers and Hispanic American workers are getting degrees in computer science and so forth, can't get it because many of these high-tech companies are abusing the H-1B visa program to bring in cheaper unskilled workers and have American workers train them. The idea that we have a skills shortage in this country is malarkey. It really is. It's not true. And what's true, and if it were true, the way that economic theory says you address that is by increasing the wages, which they don't want to do. They much rather try to find folks from elsewhere to bring them in. And we see that now. We've seen it for years in such occupations as nurses. And sometimes we'll bring in teachers from overseas. This is a massive, broad-scale attack on American workers, and it disproportionately impacts upon black workers because many of our workers have less education, but they can't get the skilled jobs. Yeah, and they have less experience.
Well,
and plus,
this is Frank. This is
with the burden of having to sign the box.
Yeah, and this is the thing, Frank, this is the thing I wanted to ask you is black Americans have been here 400 years. Why are we still working as unskilled labor? What's that about?
Well, we're not just working in unskilled labor.
I mean, so many of us. I mean, why? There's disproportionately, we are unskilled labor. Disproportionately, why?
We can't get the unskilled labor jobs. That's what's happening because many of us have criminal records because of the disproportional enforcement of the laws, of the drug laws. Many of us, and plus there are many networks. One of a UCLA professor named sociologist named Waldringer did a great book a couple of years ago pointing out how the networks for employment work for unskilled jobs, so why many blacks are not able to get them. You see that we could get them, but we don't get them. These networks go with these contractors who reach all the way. It's almost like a pipeline into different communities, to different locations. And the jobs they're not advertised. And there are no questions asked by the contractors and no question asked by the employers. And as a result, if you're not in the network, and black workers, less skilled workers are not in the network, they don't get hired. But increasingly it's going up the scale now because it's not just the unskilled workers, but many of the skilled workers are not getting hired because of abuses of immigration laws.
Okay, Frank, you know what? We're going to take a break. Can I keep you on the line for a minute? I think we've got some calls. Maybe someone wants to call and ask you a question. Why don't we take a break, and when we come back, we'll take a call. Can you stay a minute, Frank?
Sure. I'll be delighted, Kathleen.
Beautiful. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Frank, we'll take some calls. We'll be right back. The Naked Truth with Kathleen Wells.
Are you a local business owner? Are you interested in increasing customer counts and store traffic or increasing traffic to your website? If you answered yes, then you need to advertise on the Naked Truth Report. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to RJ Beaton at 818-517-KRLA. That's 818-517-5752. Or email us at rj@krla870.com. That's rj@krla870.com. Kathleen Wells, the host of the Naked Truth Report, wants to hear from you. Just like our borders, the phone lines, well, they're wide open. Call in at 866-870-KRLA. That's 866-870-5752. 866-870-KRLA.
The elected officials refuse to address the problem. The black elected officials refuse to address the problem. My own congressman refuses to address the problem. And I think the problem is black folks see all minorities as allies. And this is not the case. These people are not here for our common good. They're here for their own good. Where I don't have any ill will towards anybody, I also want to look out for my race. I'm a black American. I've never used a hyphen. but I will refuse to turn my back on my race and see what's going on in South Central to my people and let these people come in here and just take over. I'm not going to sit back and watch it. And I think it's a terrible thing, a horrendous thing for anybody to see this going on and say, well, he's a minority like me, so I won't speak up. I don't care where he comes from. The key to this whole thing is stop the denial, stop the alliances of, in other words, he's a minority like me, so I can't speak up against him. If this was white folks committing these lynchings to us in South Central, what's going on, there would be an outrage in this country. We have had firebombs thrown through windows. We have had people's cars burned in the driveway because they happened to move into the wrong communities. We had a lady who moved to East L.A., came to the state from the South, not knowing what East L.A. was. It was an all-Hispanic community. She wasn't there one day. We had another man who was burned out of his house in Torrance last year. We had 5 murders in Hawaiian Gardens just because the people were black. This would not be tolerated if this was white on black crime. But the fact that these people come here, and it's the numbers, sir. It's the numbers. They come here in the numbers, they build up the Hispanic community, and they get this sense of power against us. And there are race riots in the schools every day in Los Angeles. It never makes the media. The black kids are being run out of the schools every day and told to go back to Africa. It never makes the media. We are having people who are being discriminated against on every avenue of society, economic, schools, even in our prisons now. They have drawn lines, and our prisoners in California are being beat and harassed and raped by Hispanic gang members who recently arrived here because of the numbers. My answer to you, sir, would be we don't need any new laws. Enforce the ones we got.
See, that was Terry Anderson, the late, great Terry Anderson, who used to have a radio show here at KRLA, and he was speaking to Congress. So Congress knows the problem. Also, Peter Carrisnal has presented a report, U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He has presented a report to Congress, the Congressional Black Congress, and to Obama that talks about the devastation Black America. And it's not just Black America, it's all America, to be honest with you. But I'm going to talk about all America too, yeah. But I also focus on Black America because no one is speaking up for Black America. I'm a Black American. Someone's got to do it. So I'm doing it. George Lopez, the comedian, speaks up for Latinos because he's a Latino. I'm a Black American. I speak up for Black Americans. You get it? So this information has been put before Congress and Obama, who is not a direct descendant of slaves. Neither is Kamala Harris. She's half East Indian, half West Indian. She does not represent my interests. Anyway, we're going to go back to Frank. I just get so excited. I just get so frustrated over this stuff that I get all out of, I just lose track of where I am. And, because I wrote notes and bullet points, but I just started talking and going crazy. Right, Frank? Right, Frank?
Kathleen, it's really important that we recognize that there's a big con game that's going on. The assumption is that all the so-called people of color in some kind of progressive coalition. The fact, you like the facts, and the fact is that in census data, this is what folks should check. When we look at both Mexican Americans and look at other Americans from Central America, you will find that depending on where we're talking about, Guatemalans, Salvadorians, Hondurans, Mexicans, that they list, when they migrate to the U.S. and they list their racial identity, between 70 and 80% of the so-called brown color coalition will mark the census as white. That was the 2010 census. So this idea that somehow this is that we're all in this together doesn't play out. Also, we as black folks don't play the game the way many Latinos do. One of the things that Latinos have done, and I think all the more power to them, is that if they see that something has been going down for black folks, they will say, well, let's let them have it for Latino folks. We don't do that. For instance, you had, the HBCUs, and you had then, because it was not going to be able, or different historical circumstances, you are going to create historic Hispanic colleges and universities. What happened is you, as Anderson pointed out, the numbers, where folks, the activists defined those with a high proportion of Hispanic students as historically Hispanic, when that wasn't the case. It's completely different from the black situation. So I'm simply saying that there are so many things that are going down here that folks don't know. The power elite will try to imply, well, what can we do? We have all these people here, illegals, therefore you've got to keep them. Now, what most folks also don't know, let's talk about some facts. 40% of those who are illegal did not come from Central American. They're not Mexican or Honduran or Ecuadorian. These 40% are those who came to the United States and often flew right in, and on tourist visas, on education visas, and on business visas, and overstayed, flipped their nose, and they started working. And, simply ignored the enforcement. Just as they flew in, they can fly right back out. And that's 40%.
Yeah, 40%.
And they're holding jobs that are, and we're not talking about low-skill jobs for many of them. And this non-enforcement of the laws, Terry was so right. This non-enforcement of the laws is really, we black Americans ought to be raising all kinds of hell, because we have had laws enforced against us that weren't laws.
Right.
Whether we're talking about.
Right. I mean, black men get arrested, get a ticket for throwing chewing gum out the window, okay? We know what they get a ticket for jaywalking. They go to jail for smoking a joint.
The illegal workers coming in here. They don't want to enforce. They violate immigration laws. They violate labor laws. They've often violated laws against smuggling. Document fraud. These are serious kinds of things. And what also should bother black America was noted how when they started overwhelming the borders with the kids coming up from Central America, supposedly that they were unaccompanied. Now, how can you be unaccompanied when you're with a mother and so forth, and just asked to be arrested at the border? These folks will come up. Allegedly, they are unaccompanied, and then if they're put in detention, remember the outcry. There was, you're breaking up families. Oh, this is so wrong. When folks have come in illegally, but in reality, the extent of the breakup of the black families, which you mentioned, from the non-imprisonment of drug laws and increasing imprisonment of black women, is outrageous. It's multiple times that. But you've got no outcry about the impact on black families.
Well, like I said, only 25%
valued, and black people are not valued.
Exactly.
Immigration myths. And I've had to deal with Sheila Jackson Lee.
Sheila Jackson Lee in Texas. Yeah.
In Texas. Testifying before Congress. When Sheila says, well, we're all children of immigrants. I say, no, we're not. The way that our parents, and this is what you were mentioning, the way the parents of most black Americans came over, that was not immigration by any way of the word. And this is an attempt to ignore history. We are an ahistorical people because we do not want to recognize the accountability for the effects of the past that are still with us, that have been compounded.
Yeah, we don't tell the truth. And, all of our politicians should be sent out to the center square and, court-martialed or something. Anyway, we have a call from Shirley. Why don't we take a call? Hi, Shirley from Pasadena. Hi, Shirley.
Hello?
Are you still on? Oh, hi, Shirley.
Hi, Kathleen. How are you? This is Shirley Hussar.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Kathleen Wells, congratulations on your new show and your guest. Wow, what an explosive show to be your first show. Fabulous, on point, raw, real, in your face, amazing, phenomenal. I'm just so engaged with this topic that you're talking on. My question has to do with the following: economics. Living in Los Angeles, as those who may not know me, that I am a delegate for Donald Trump and a surrogate for President Trump for California. I made the announcement. And as a native, I also feel the pain and the destitute and the devastation within the black community. We're at 6%. So my question to your guest is, people don't understand. Tell the people, explain to me even more. The black economic economy is devastated. We don't have one here, but yet the illegal immigrants can continue to recycle their dollars, and by using cash, doing cash transactions, sending cash over to Mexico, sending cash over to their family members. They can wire money through Snapchat and through Walmart and other venues. This underground wealth of operation of an economic flow within the illegal world. It only drains and kills Californians, but the black people are just shut out. We're shut. If you don't speak English, if you don't speak Spanish, when you go to the store, when you go for an interview, they'll tell you, we don't hire you. It's pure, blatant discrimination. And economically, that's why you have such a large percentage of millennials living at home with their parents, especially black, because the illegal immigrants have that wealth flow that we don't. What's the answer to stopping that?
Yeah, so do you have a question for Frank, Shirley?
Yes, I got the question. The sister is absolutely right. And you never hear anyone talk about what's called remittances. The fact that so much of the money, one of the other, let me just clarify that. One of the other principles of economic growth for any country is what's called the multiplier effect. In other words, when you spend $1, it goes to somebody else. And one of our problems in the black community is we haven't spent enough in our black communities. We turn it over maybe most 1 or 2 times, where in other communities the money is turned over multiple times in that community, generating economic activity. But what's happening now with illegal workers and the remittances going out of the country makes our balance of payments worse. It works against our collective national interest. Now, it works in the interest of the other countries, but if we're Americans, we should be concerned about our other countries. There are better ways to develop Mexico and El Salvador, and more direct ways in building their infrastructure and numerous other ways than by the losses, weakening of the American economy through increased remittances. And the answer, what the sister was mentioning about the access to jobs, is that we don't enforce E-Verify. E-Verify is the system which checks the Social Security number of the so-called workers, of the potential worker, against the Social Security database. And many times they're fraudulent. And they can be picked. And they can be caught by E-Verify. It's almost 99 or 0.7% accurate. But because it's not totally 100% accurate, the activists of the other side will stress that this shouldn't be used because it doesn't get it's not perfect. Can't get every single one, even though you get 99.3 or 99.7. Mm-hmm. And it's the abuse of the laws, the non-enforcement of laws that were meant to protect American workers. Mm-hmm. And that we really need to focus on. Mm-hmm. 2 and 2, connecting the dots. We've got to get there. We've got to get to the enforcement of the laws, the existing laws. And to the Trump administration's credit, one of the things that they've done by tightening up all along here, you've seen the illegal flow cut significantly, because folks have, and this is without really much interior enforcement, just mostly the fear of enforcement at the border. Mm-hmm. And what you have is that once it's clear to people that we're serious about enforcing our laws, our immigration laws, we will get a great reduction in the flows.
But that's why the wall has to be built, because once Trump is out of office, they'll start coming right back. It'll just that's why the wall has to be built.
I'm for the wall, but I think even more important is what's called interior enforcement. And that's it by looking at the American workforces of folks who are in these high areas where you have illegal workers, especially in construction, especially in light manufacturing, especially in the health services, when you have audits from the Labor Department or IRS of the Social Security numbers, and that's how you really restrict the flow. When you get American jobs for American workers, and folks find that they can't beat the system and still be employed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, Shirley, are you still with us?
I'm still here. Yes, I'm still here. Yes.
So do you want to make one final comment?
I do. I kind of do. You know, I understand what you both are saying, but I think the American people who listen to the station need to understand that these illegals do not have to have permits to make an economic financial base for their families here in California. Let me explain. On the corners, they sell hot dogs with pork wrapped around it. There's no regulation, no health code regulation. You can get hepatitis A. I wrote an article in the Community Digital News talking about California looming. And so I want to know from the gentleman, you know, what do you feel about all this, you know, illegal immigrants selling food that can affect their health? And they invaded the black community, took our businesses, and staged their own, and then they don't have to pay any regulation or any permit.
Okay, thank you, Shirley Frank.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. It's one of the compound things that works against African Americans. But once again, it gets to the non-enforcement of the laws. We really have to have our laws enforced. Sister Shirley was right. We have the laws on the books, but when they're not enforcing them, and you know, we Americans have a tendency, and it's a bad tendency, that we don't usually enforce laws until we get an absolute emergency. When people start dying with that hepatitis, then all of a sudden we'll enforce them with a vengeance. But then that's usually late. It's late for the people that have suffered, and it's late for us. We as African Americans haven't understood what segregation taught us, that we need to really gather to really be more supportive of each other, and to place demands on both our politicians and start pooling our economic resources. We've got to start trusting. Some of these institutions for black capital formation need to be held accountable too. These huge mega churches need to have credit unions that start offering money that can compete with the payday lenders. We need to once again look at trying to support banks and develop credit unions, develop co-ops. There are numerous kinds of things that we need to do. But first, we need to have the laws enforced that will open up, you know, many of the kinds of jobs that we're just simply closed out now. One of the other things we need to do is eliminate that the mark in the box. The fact that once we've had any kind of arrest, and so many of our young people have had arrests, that forecloses employers from hiring them, and that's a choice of employers. That they should not be having this show be early on that they've been in jail. But if we started enforcing the laws to reduce the supply of these other workers, and that they would leave. They would really leave if they could not find jobs, because they're not used to living in the United States.
Yeah, but we're not. We have. It's black politicians, black talking heads. We have to blame them. They have to be held.
Yes,
they need to be out because they have lied and used and abused us for 5 decades. They need to go. Get rid of them. That's it. We're done. We're finished. You were the executive director for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. The Congressional Black Caucus has done nothing. Maxine Waters, all these people have a lot of nerve to even say anything against anyone.
We as a community have to learn that we have to hold all of our politicians accountable. In the black community, I've seen it too much that the belief maybe comes from our church, many of our identification with some of the black churches, but the general belief that we just need to get a good person in. Once they get in, they'll do the right thing. And they don't do the right thing unless we're really watching them. And on their case. That's what we have not learned. And also we've not learned to make demands. We haven't been demanding these things. We haven't been demanding capital formation. Have we demanded that our churches or our credit unions start funding small enterprises for black folks? Have we started picketing the construction signs, the construction zones that are in our communities that are using illegal workers? We've got an activist slate across the board that we need to attack on all fronts. All I'm simply saying, you're right, they need to be called out, but we need to be looking at legal suits to challenge illegal workforce who are not enforcing E-Verify. We need to call out contractors or banks that are funding funding these construction projects that have no accountability for American workers, that American workers can't get. These are the kinds of things that we've got to start doing that we haven't been doing all across the board.
Well, listen, I love Jeff Sessions because he's right-headed on this issue. But for Trump, we wouldn't even be discussing immigration, okay? Because Hillary Clinton was for globalism. Right. She was. These Democrats are for globalism. Black Americans would be relegated to a permanent underclass if Hillary Clinton, if any Democrat gets in office. Kamala Harris, whoever they're going to run in 2020, is the same story. Black people need to get off the Democratic plantation. How much do you hit your head up against
to follow the money? The globalists is buying the politicians. What's happened until we get in the United States a constitutional amendment that says that you have free access for the politicians or for our politics, for the public at times of election, and for a limited period of time. You cannot, our system of where money is governing politics, it owns the black ones as well as the white ones. We really got to get money out of politics.
We got to get money out of politics, but, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that one because, how do I feel about that one? But for Trump having the money that he did have, he would not have won. But he wasn't tied into special interests, and that was the good thing. He's talking about draining the swamp. He's talking about making America great again. When I say that, black folks are crazy, some of us, right? We have to admit it. Some of them think, he's going to ship us back to Africa. No, he's talking about making America great, putting special interests out of politics, putting them out of politics. That's what he's talking about. But you know what? I think we only got a few minutes left, or not even a few minutes, but a few seconds. And what I want to say is that I thank you, Frank, for being my first guest on the Naked Truth Report. You were delightful.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's been an honor. Thank you again.
I'm going to have you on again. Also, I would like to say that my web designer is working on my website, thenakedtruthreport.com. Please check it out. Also, I have the Naked Truth Report on Facebook. Please check that out also. This song, I'm ending with this song. This is a love song. I want to end with a love song for folks who have deep roots in America, deep roots in California, and deep roots in Los Angeles. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my first show on KRLA AM 870, The Answer, The Naked Truth Report. I really appreciate you listening.
The Naked Truth Report was paid for and furnished by Kathleen Wells.